Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud, Daf 10 of Masechta Rosh Hashanah. There's some interesting stuff that comes up in today's Daf L'maaseh. We discuss how exactly to count the years of Orlah. Pretty interesting actually at the end of the day. We're going to see. It's kind of interesting. And also we're going to see how much time do you have to plant in advance of shemittah. That's also extremely interesting, right? We had discussed yesterday about mosif michol ala kodesh, that we add from sort of non-holy onto holy. So how much time do you, in advance of shemittah, do you have to finish your planting? So these are all extremely interesting things. Let us begin on Daf Testament Beis. 4 lines from the bottom by the 2 dots. Tanur Rabbanan the Rabbi Stad Echad Anoteya. A fellow who plants, Echad Mavrich, a fellow who, I don't really understand how this works, but takes like a branch and like bends it over into the ground so that it can somehow grow or something. Echad Markiv, somebody who grafts, I guess you basically chop a branch or something and shtup it into some other tree or something like that, and then voila, something happens. So, Erev Shvius, Shloshim Yom Lifnei Rosh Hashanah. So if you do any of these activities on the 6th year, 30 plus days before Rosh Hashanah, also Lo Shana, so comes Tishrei, comes the 1st of Tishrei, and voila, it's as though this tree that you planted is already now 1 year old, right? Because comes Rosh Hashanah, it counts as a year. So as long as you, let's just say, planted this tree 30 plus days before Tishrei, so also Lo Shana, so it counts as a year. Umutar l'kamen b'shvius, and you can also keep them on shvius. No problem. You planted it 30 plus days before Shemitah, so comes Tishrei, it's already considered a year old, and also you do not need to uproot it. However, Pachos mishloshim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah, but if you plant this tree less than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah on the 6th year, i.e. right before Shemitah begins, lo also Lo Shana. So, if this wasn't Shemitah for a second, right, let's say it was any other year of the cycle, well, if you plant this tree within 30 days of Rosh Hashanah, so it will not count as 1 year. So when Tishrei comes, less than 30 days from then, it will not count as 1 full year. Also the common b'shvius, and if it is Shemitah the following year, you can not keep it on Shemitah, you have to uproot it. As Rashi says, because we have to add from the chol ala kodesh, and therefore you have to actually uproot it. Since it was less than 30 days, you have to add at least 30 days onto Shemitah, and since it was less than that, you must uproot it. That sounds like fun. Now, uferis netiya zo asurin ad tu b'shvat im le'orlah orlah v'im le'revai revai. Friends, this is very, 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 very interesting. What this means is that the way that you calculate 3 years for a tree is a shtickle moving target. What that means is that, so say you plant your tree, if it's an apple tree, so you plant it before 30 plus days before Tishrei, alright? And then comes Tishrei, 1 year is up, right? So it's already considered 1 year old. Comes the year after that on Tishrei, it's now considered 2 years old. The following year after that at Tishrei, technically speaking, it's now 3 years old. But something crucial has taken place over that time. It has gone from being a seed to being a tree. It is now an apple tree. It's not an apple seed anymore. Now, of course, we also know from the first Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, just like the 1st of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for Netios, for Orlah, but Tu B'Shvat is Chag Leilanus. Tu B'Shvat is Rosh Hashanah le'ilon, is the Rosh Hashanah for trees. At this point, 3 years later, this apple seed is now an apple tree, which means that its Rosh Hashanah is now 4 months later at Shvat. So it's interesting, the Rosh Hashanah for these trees is actually a shtickle moving target. So, again, you plant this apple tree, you basically put a seed in the ground 30 plus days before the first of Tishrei. So, when it comes Tishrei, that's already bumps it up to the next year. For the following Tishrei, it's now 2 years old. The Tishrei after that, it's now 3 years old. However, because it's now a tree, the Rosh Hashanah le'ilanus is in another 4 months in Shvat, which means that any fruits between Tishrei of the 3rd year and Shvat of the 3rd year, any fruits that emerge during that time are still considered Orlah and are not allowed to be eaten until Tu B'Shvat of that year. And the same thing applies to Neter Avai, right? And that the first 3 years of a tree, the fruits are what's called Orlah. You're not allowed to eat them. And then the 4th year, you take the fruits and eat them in Yerushalayim. So the same thing for Avai, that if you then wait 1 more year, now on Tishrei of the 4th year, still any fruits that emerge between Tishrei of the 4th year and Tu B'Shvat of that 4th year are still considered Neta Revai. Kilu, meaning, again, you plant this apple tree 30 plus days before Tishrei. Comes Tishrei, it's now considered 1 year old. Comes the Tishrei after that, it's considered 2 years old. Comes the Tishrei after that, it's considered 3 years old. Comes the Tishrei after that, it's considered 4 years old. Right? In which case, it's no longer Neter Avai. Right? Once the tree is 3 years old, it's no longer Orlah, but now it's Neter Avai until the next year. Comes the next year, it's now 4 years old, so it's no longer Neter Avai, but because it's only Tishrei, any fruits that emerge at this point need to wait until, are basically going to be considered Neter Avai up until Tu B'Shvat, and any fruits that emerge after Tu B'Shvat of that year are no longer Neter Avai, and you could do whatever you want with them. So it's very, very interesting that while we start counting the years of the tree based on Tishrei, while it's still simply a seed, however, by the time it becomes a tree 3 years later, it's already governed by the Rosh Hashanah le'ilanus, which is Tu B'Shvat. So extremely, extremely interesting. So again, uferis nitiyah zo, and these fruits asurin, even after 3 years, any fruits that emerge after Tishrei are still asur because of Orlah, ad tesvav B'Shvat, until Tu B'Shvat of that year, im Orlah. So if we're talking about after 3 years, we're going to say that these fruits that emerge are still going to be considered Orlah until after Tu B'Shvat. Then any fruits that emerge after that would no longer be considered Orlah. Any fruits that emerge before then are Orlah and must be discarded. Ve'im l'revai. And if it's the following year, after Tishrei, the fruits that emerge continue to be Neter Revai and have to be eaten in Yerushalayim until Tu B'Shvat. Any fruits that emerge after Tu B'Shvat you can do whatever you want with them, because it's past Neter Revai after Tu B'Shvat of that year. How do we know these halachas? So Amr Reb Chia bar Abba, Amr Reb Yochanan, Umatuba b'shmei Reb Yanai, says Reb Chia bar Abba in the name of Reb Yochanan, some take say it was Reb Yanai, Omar Kra. The pasuk says, U Bashana Arvias, U Bashana Achmishis. Chavi, you got the U over there? That U is the key to understanding this. It says, U Bashana Arvias. And the U, the Vav, is adding. So, U Bashana Arvias. There's some kind of addition to this 4th year. U Bashana Achmishis. There's some kind of addition to this 5th year. What does that mean? Paimim shebervias v'adayin asur mishum orla. Ufayim shebachamishes v'adayin asur mishum revai. What it means is that sometimes you can even be still in the 4th year, right? Orla applies to the first 3 years, but sometimes you can even be in the 4th year and Orla still applies, i.e., if the fruit emerges in the 4th year, sort of after the Tishrei, before Tu B'Shvat. And the same thing applies in the 5th year. Once it's Tishrei, now it's the 5th year, but still the fruits that emerge will be Neter Revai until Tu B'Shvat. That was gewaldig, right? Let's go weiter. Where am I? Lema delo Reb Meir. Gishmak. So let us say that this brisa that we read at the beginning of the daf, that says that prior to Rosh Hashanah, you have to wait 30 days. The brisa says that prior to Rosh Hashanah, prior to the first of Tishrei of Shemitah, you have to plant the tree 30 plus days in advance. Because you have to be Mosif Michol Al Kodesh, we extend Shemitah. And therefore, you can't plant your apple tree within 30 days of Shemitah. It has to be more than 30 days. So let's say, Delok Reb Meir. Let's say that this is not like Reb Meir. Why? What does Reb Meir say? Reb Meir ha'omar yom echad b'shana chashuv shana. Because Reb Meir's opinion is that one day in the year can be considered like the entire year. And therefore, if it was Reb Meir, why should I have to add 30 days onto Shemitah? To say that I have to plant my apple tree 30 plus days before Shemitah? One day should suffice. Yom echad b'shana chashuv shana. One day can already be considered like an entire year. And therefore, if it was Reb Meir, I should just be able to plant my apple tree a day before Rosh Hashanah of Shemitah. A day before the first of Tishrei of Shemitah. But it says 30 days. So Memele, it must not be Reb Meir. The Tanyas, we learn in the Brisa, how do we know that Reb Meir says that Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, that one day in the year is considered like an entire year? The Tanyas, we learn in the Brisa, Par Omer B'Torah Stam, whenever it says par in the Torah, whenever it says a cow in the Torah, it's a 3-year-old cow. Ben Esem V'Arba Chodesh V'Yom Echad Reb Meir. Reb Meir says, and how do you calculate 3 years? 24 months, which obviously is 2 years, and 1 day. That once this cow is 24 months and a day, it's already considered 3 years old. So we see that 1 day into the 3rd year is already considered like the entire year. Reb Elazar Omer says, Reb Elazar, Ben Esem V'Arba Chodesh V'Lamed Yom. Whereas Reb Elazar says, no, it would have to be 24 months and 30 days. That in order for it to be considered a 3rd year, it needs to be at least 30 days. Shai Reb Meir Omer, because Reb Meir would say, whenever the Torah says a calf, stam, just like a calf, where it just says a calf, ben shona, it means a 1-year-old calf. Ben boker, ben shtaim. If it says ben boker, it means a 2-year-old cow. Par, ben shalosh. If the pasuk says a cow, a par, so then it means 3 years old. So what do we see? So we see that Reb Meir says, Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, that 1 day in a year could already be considered like an entire year. And therefore, I would think that based on that, Reb Meir would say that as long as you plant a apple tree on Erev Shemitah at least 1 day before the first of Tishrei, so that should suffice because you have your 1 day that you're being Mosif Michol Al Kodesh, Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, 1 day is already can be considered like an entire year. So just give 1 day in advance and that should be enough. But the Brisa says that you have to give 30 days. So Memele, it's not Reb Meir, Afilu Tema Reb Meir. To which the Gemara says, I can even make the argument that the Brisa is Reb Meir. I can even make the argument that the Brisa is Reb Meir. So what's the deal with the 30-day requirement? I thought Yom Echad V'Shana Chashuv Shana. Friends, you ready for this? Ki ka'amar Reb Meir Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana B'Sof Shonim. Ava B'Tchilas Shonim Lo. Ho 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 ho. Friends, you like it, right? Of course, Memele. We want to argue that perhaps when Reb Meir says that you could say that 1 day in the year is considered like the entire year, so that is at the end of the counting of years. Meaning, you have this cow, it's already 2 full years old, it's 24 months old. So now we're closing in on the 3rd year. 1 day in the 3rd year will treat like the entire 3rd year, and 24 months in a day, Reb Meir will say is enough. However, when it comes to counting, when it comes to the beginning of years, right, when we're trying to figure out, how old is this tree? And the Brisa, in addition to saying that you have to plant the tree 30 plus days before shemittah begins, the Brisa also says that in order for a tree to be considered 1 year old regarding Orlah at the first of Tishrei, the Brisa had also said that it has to be planted at least 30 days in advance. So what do we see? So we see that in order to say Yom Echad B'Shana, so what we see is that Reb Meir would say that at the beginning of the counting, so for example, when we're trying to figure out how old is this tree with regard to Orlah, we won't say Yom Echad B'Shana Chashav Shana, meaning Orlah needs to be 3 years, right? You have to count 3 years for the tree. So what we want to argue is that, well, as long as you plant this tree 1 day before Tishrei, before Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, it can already count as 1 full year. To which we're saying, wait a second. That would be saying that 1 day can count as a full year, even as the first year. Kilu, we know that Reb Meir says that when it comes to the cow, that the 1 day year is the last of the years, right? It's already 24 months old. And we're saying 1 more day can count as the last of the 3 years for it to be considered a par. But if we were to apply that to Orlah, so then we would be saying that the first year can be a 1 day year. That as long as you plant the tree 1 day before Tishrei, then that 1 day is going to be the entire first year. Then you just need to wait 2 more full years, and now you have 3 years. We want to argue that Reb Meir would not say that. That while Reb Meir says that by the cow, the 1 day into the third year can count as the entire third year, he would not say that by Orlah to say that as long as you plant the tree 1 day in advance of Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, it would count as the entire first year. No, he won't say that at the beginning of the years. He'll say that only at the end of the years. He won't say that for the first of the 3 years, but he will say that for the third of the 3 years. Okay, fine. So again, Afilu Teimu Reb Meir, you can even say that the author of that Brisa that we learned at the beginning of the daf, which says that a tree that is planted within 30 days of Rosh Chodesh Tishrei will not be considered 1 year old with regard to counting for Orlah at Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. So you can even say that it is Reb Meir. And even though Reb Meir says that to count the third year of this cow 1 day is enough, but ki ka'am Reb Meir Yom Echad B'Shana Chashav Shana B'Sof Shana. When Reb Meir says that you can count 1 day as a full year, that is for the last of the years that you need to count. For example, the 3 years for the cow, the last of the 3 years can be a 1 day year. But when we're counting the beginning of a series of years, such as for Orlah, that we want the first year to be an abbreviated year, he would not say that 1 day is enough to be considered a full year. He would say that you need at least 30 days in that case. To which Rava says, 1 second. Rava says that logically speaking, I would argue that the opposite is true. What's the opposite? Umanida she'ein tchilas hayom olala besofa, sof hayom olala betchilasa, shonim sheyom echad olala besofa, enudin sheyom echad olala betchilasa. Okay. So, Rava says 1 second. If we take a look at the case of a nida, for example. Mida oraisa. How does nida work? Mida oraisa, if a woman sees dam nida, so then she becomes a nida for 7 days. Even if she sees dam on every one of those 7 days, it really doesn't matter, right? She sees dam once, she's now a nida for 7 days. Whether she sees dam every day of those 7 days, whether she doesn't, it makes no difference. She's a nida for 7 days. And then after 7 days, she goes to the mikveh and she's no longer a nida. Midra abanan, things have changed. Okay, now, let's take a look at day 7 of being a nida. So, on day 7, we do not say mikzas hayom kekula. we do not say that when a woman wakes up on the 7th day of being a nida, mida oraisa, she could just say, okay, I'm on day 7, I haven't seen any dam, let me go to the mikveh right now, and that's that. She cannot do that. We don't say that part of the day counts as the whole day. We do not say miksas hayom kekula. She has to wait for 7 full days, and then the following night, she can go to the mikveh. Now, even though at the end of the 7 days of nida, we do not say miksas hayom kekula, that part of the day counts as a whole day. However, at the beginning of being a nida, so for example, let's say it's Monday, and Monday evening, right before Shkia, she sees dam. So then that entire Monday can count as day 1 of being a nida, even though she wasn't a nida until the very end of the day. But nonetheless, that'll count as, that entire day counts as day 1, and she just needs to wait 6 more days to be as a nida deoraisa. So we see that by nida, even though at the end of being a nida, part of the day does not count as a whole day. She has to wait the entire 7th day before she can go to the mikveh. Yet at the beginning of being a nida, part of the day counts as an entire day. That if she sees dam at the end of the day on the first day, it still counts as though she was a nida the entire day. Well then, if we apply it back to Reb Meir's opinion on Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, if already when it comes to the cow, we see that at the end of the 3 years of counting, that after the cow is 2 years old, once it's just 1 day into the 3rd year, it's already considered like the entire 3rd year has passed. So then, Mimele, I should apply that to the beginning of counting of years, which is that when it comes to Orlah, once 1 day has passed in the 1st year, it should be considered like the entire year. And therefore, if I plant a tree 1 day before Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, that should be enough. Again, just like the nida, right? Just like by nida, on day 7 of being a nida, we do not say that miksas hayom kekulo, that after part of the day, if she doesn't see blood, she can already go to the mikveh and be done. We do not say that. And yet when it comes to counting the years by a par, we say that 1 day into the 3rd year can already count as the entire year. Well then, if by nida, where we don't say that part of the day counts as a whole day at the end, and yet we do say that if she sees dam at the end of the day on day 1, it counts for the entire day. So then, memele by year, counting years, we should say that if there's 1 day right before Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, it should count as the entire year, as though there was already 1 year that has passed. So again, manida she'ein tchilas hayom Orlah b'sofa. When it comes to anida, the beginning of the 7th day does not count as though it's been an entire day. She has to wait till the end of the 7th day to go to the mikveh. And yet, sof hayom Orlah b'tchilasa, and yet at the beginning of being a nida, if she sees dam at the end of the day, it counts as though she was a nida from the beginning of that day. So shonim, when it comes to years, sheyom echad Orlah b'sofa, as we see by counting the years of a par, that already the 1 day into the 3rd year is already considered like the entire 3rd year. Enudin sheyom echad Orlah b'tchilasa. Wouldn't it therefore be logical to say that when it comes to counting years, 1 day at the end of the year should count as an entire year? That if you plant a tree at least 1 day before Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, it should be considered like it's already an entire year old. So therefore, the Rava wants to argue that logically speaking, it would make sense to say that just like Reb Meir says, Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, when for the last of the years, he would also say Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana for the first of the years. So if that's the case, so then who is the Tana who says that when it comes to shemittah, you have to wait at least 30 days? That you have to plant the tree at least 30 days before, not for shemittah, for Yovel. I mean, the Brisa is also talking about shemittah, but who's the author of this Brisa who, part of what he says is that when it comes to counting Orlah, you would have to have at least 30 days before Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. So ve'elamai, Rebbe Elazar. So what? Are we going to suggest that it's Rebbe Elazar? Shloshim b'shloshim bay. But if it's Rebbe Elazar, then he would require 60 days. So if we want to say that the author of that brisa is Rabbi Eliezer, so then 30 days wouldn't be enough. It would actually have to be 60 days. How come? It's not honest. We're learning the Mishnah. Right? Did I read that yet? So Elamai, Rabbi Elazar, would it say it's Rabbi Elazar, Shloshim v'Shloshim Bayim, and then we would need 60 days? That's not as we learn in the Mishnah. A notin vein mavrichin vein markivin, that we don't plant, we don't bend over the branch into the ground, we don't graft, Erev Shvius, right before Shemitah, Pachos milamid yom, within 30 days, Lifnei Rosh Hashanah, before Rosh Hashanah. Okay? V'im not avirich v'yirkiv ya'akor, and if you plant a tree within 30 days of the first of Tishrei, at the beginning of Shemitah, so if it's less than 30 days, you have to uproot it. Okay? Fine. And the assumption being that, well, you need, the Tanna Kama is saying that you need 30 days for the tree to take root. And if it's less than 30 days, it's going to be taking root on Shemitah. And you can't have it take root on Shemitah. And therefore, we're going to have to uproot it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, Kol ha'kov v'she'eno koletes b'gimel yom shuv eno koletes. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. You really just need 3 days for a tree to take root. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Omer shtei Shabbosos. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say 2 weeks. Okay. From Rav Nachman and Rabbi Bar Avua, and says Rav Nachman, in the name of Rabbi Bar Avua, the Divrei Omer Lamed, that according to Tanna Kama, who says that it takes 30 days for the tree to take root, tzarich lamed v'shloshim, you really need 30 plus another 30. You really need 60 days. Because you need 30 days for the tree to first take root, and then after that, you have to wait another 30 days to add on before Shemitah. The Divrei Omer Shlosha, tzarich shlosha v'shloshim. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it takes 3 days for the tree to take root, so you need 33 days, because 3 days for the tree to take root, and another 30 days to add on to Shemitah. The Divrei Omer Beis Shabbosos tzarich shtei Shabbosos v'shloshim yom, and according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, who say that you need to give 2 weeks for the plant to take root, for the tree to take root, you need 2 weeks plus the 30 days that you need to add on to Rosh Hashanah. That you have to add on to Shemitah. So, therefore, right, even if we want, right, even if we want to say 30 days like Rabbi Elazar, really, it's going to be 30 days plus another 30 days. V'inamik Rabbi Yehuda, and even if we say that Rabbi Elazar holds like Rabbi Yehuda with regard to trees taking root, Gimel v'shloshim bay, he's still going to need 3 days for the plant to take root and another 30 to be considered adding on to Shemitah. El Olam, Reb Meir. So therefore it must be Reb Meir, right? Because if we say Reb Elazar, it's going to have to be more than 30 days, because Reb Elazar does not say Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana. Reb Meir says Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, that 1 day in a year already can be considered a year. And therefore you really only need 1 day before Shemitah in order for it to be considered like you've been adding on to Shemitah. Whereas Rebbe Elazar says that you really need 30 days in order for something to be considered, right? In order for it to be considered a year, in order for something to be considered significant. And therefore, according to Rebbe Elazar, even if he holds that by a tree taking root, it's 3 days, like Rabbi Yehuda, which is the shortest amount that we see in the Brisa, you're still going to have to add another 30 days, according to Rabbi Elazar, in order for it to be considered adding on to Shemitah. So therefore, according to Rabbi Elazar, it would have to be at least 33 days. So therefore, El Olam Reb Meir. So really, the Brisa is Reb Meir. So then what's the deal with the 30 days? Because we had said earlier that it would make sense that according to Reb Meir, just like he says Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana at the end of the counting of the years, he would also say that at the beginning of the counting of the years. So shouldn't one day be enough? Why 30? That when Reb Meir says that you have to wait 30 days before, they have to plant something at least 30 days before Rosh Chodesh Tishrei by Shemitah, it's because, well, it takes 30 days for the plant to take root. So even though Reb Meir would say Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, and just adding one day onto Shemitah would be enough in terms of Tosefes Shemitah, in terms of adding onto Shemitah, but nonetheless, you still need to give the plant, the tree, enough time for it to take root before Shemitah begins, so that it's not taking root on Shemitah. And that's why you have to plant it 30 days in advance. To which the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, then Reb Meir should say that you have to plant the tree 31 days in advance. 30 days for it to take root, plus another one for it to be considered like you're adding on to Shemitah. So Kasavar Yom Lamed Orlah L'chan L'chan, well, Reb Meir holds that the 30th day works in both directions. It works both as the 30th day that it can take root, and also as the one day before Shemitah begins, that it can be considered like you added on to Shemitah. Omer Reb Yochanan, says Reb Yochanan, Ushnein Mikra Echad Darshu. And both Reb Meir, who says that Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, that one day is enough to be considered a year, and Reb Elazar says that you need 30 days. So they both learn it out from the same pasuk. And the pasuk says by Noach, at the end of the flood, by Ba'achaz V'Sheish Meos Shana, it was in the 601st year, Barishon, in the first month, Be'echad LaChodesh, on the first of the month. Reb Meir holds Midakati Yom Echadhu, from the fact that we're saying that it was the first day of the first month, i.e. the first day of the year, Huda Ayel Bashana, it was only one day into the year, V'Kakari La Shana, and yet it was calling it a year, right? It says, Vayi Ba'achaz V'Sheish Meos Shana. It was already 601 years. And then it clarifies, oh wait, by the way, we're only talking about one day into the year. So from the fact that it was only one day into the year and it was already considering it to be 601 full years, Shema Mina, Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, so we see that one day into the year is already considered like an entire year. V'idach, whereas Reb Elazar argues, Iksiv B'Sheish Meos V'Achas Shana K'Dekamer. Look, if it would say after 601 years, and the fact of the matter is it was only one day into the year, then sure, I get it. One day in the year is already considered like a whole year. When it says in 1 and 600 years, Shana Ashesh Meoskai, the years is going on the 600, i.e. 600 years, and also 1. My Achas, what's this 1? Aschata the Achas Kamer, the beginning of the 601st year, but it's not yet considered an entire year. So Reb Elazar argues that we would not say that one day is already considered like a whole year. Reb Elazar my time. So how does Reb Elazar learn from that pasuk that 30 days is considered a year? The pasuk says, Barishon Be'echad LaChodesh. Well, it says it was in the first month, on the first of the month. So Midakati Yom Echadhu Ta'ayel B'Chodesh V'Kakari Lechodesh. It's saying Be'echad LaChodesh. And even though it's only one day into the month, and already we're saying LaChodesh, it's already considered an entire month. Shmamino Yom Echad B'Chodesh Chashuv Chodesh. So we see that one day in the month is already considered like a whole month. Umid Yom Echad B'Chodesh Chashuv Chodesh. From the fact that the first day of the month is considered an entire month. Lamed Yom B'Shana Chashuvim Shana. 30 days into a year is considered a year. V'Chodesh L'Mnuyav V'Shana L'Mnuyah. That a month is sort of considered a full month after one of its sort of building blocks, i.e. a month is made up of days, so after one day it can be considered a full month. And also a year, based on how it's counted, a year is counted by how many months are in it, and therefore after 1 month into the year, it's already considered like an entire year. So that is how Reb Elazar learns, because it says, right, Be'echad LaChodesh, that one day is already considered like a whole month. So if one day is like a month, so then 1 month is like a year. Okay, that was Daf Yud, Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Kind of an interesting daf. The first part of the daf talked about kind of how we count. So first we said that when it comes to Erev Shemitah, you need to plant a tree at least 30 days before Shemitah begins. If it's less than 30 days, so then you're going to have to uproot it. We also then said something very interesting, which is when it comes to counting the years of Orlah, so while initially Rosh Hashanah is based on the first of Tishrei, because that's for netios, for things that are planted, but by the time the third year comes around, it's already a tree. and the Rosh Hashanah for trees is Tu B'Shvat. So Kilu, once it gets to the first of Tishrei of the third year, you then have to wait another 4.5 months until Tu B'Shvat in order for it to no longer be considered Orlah, and 1 year after that in order for it to no longer be considered Neter Avai. Then we were trying to figure out who the author of this brisa is that's saying that in order for it to be considered a year with regard to Orlah, it has to be planted at least 30 days in advance, and also that in order for it to not be uprooted on shemittah, it would also have to be planted at least 30 days in advance. So first we want to say that it cannot be Reb Meir, because Reb Meir says Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, that 1 day in a year is already considered enough. So that would mean that 1 day before Tishrei should be enough in order for it to be considered like the plant is 1 year old. But then we talk about a Kal V'chomer from Nida to say that Taka it could be so to say that. No, I'm sorry. So then we said that no, that Reb Meir only says Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana at the end of a series of years, but at the beginning of a series of years he wouldn't say that, and he would say that you need 30 days. To which we brought a Kal V'chomer from Nida to say that no, that wouldn't make sense. Reb Meir would say Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana even at the beginning. So then it sounds like the brisa cannot be Reb Meir. But then we suggested, but then who would it be? Would it be Reb Elazar, who says that 30 days in a year is considered a year? But Reb Elazar would say that in addition to the plant needing to take root before Shemitah, so that it won't be taking root on Shemitah, you would then, after that, have to wait another 30 days prior to Shemitah in order for it to be considered 1 year old, in order for it to be considered adding on to Shemitah. And therefore, the earliest thing that Reb Elazar would say in terms of the earliest opinion that you could say in terms of taking root is 3 days. And then you need 3 days plus another 30 days in order for it to be considered a year, since it's taken root, in order for it to be considered adding on to Shemitah. So therefore, it can't be Reb Elazar, because the minimum would be 33 days. So we're saying that it must be Reb Meir, and what he's saying is the reason why you need 30 days prior to Shemitah is because it takes 30 days for the plant to take root. And therefore, it takes 30 days for the plant to take root, and then you need to have a day for it to be considered 1 year, Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, that it's considered 1 year before Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, and the plant can be considered 1 year old, and also it would be considered like you added on to Shemitah, and therefore, according to Reb Meir, 30 days would suffice. It doesn't need to be 31, because the last of the days works as both the final of the 30 days for taking root, as well as the 1 day to be considered the 1 year prior to Tishrei. Okay, well, that was Daf Yud of Masechta Rosh Hashanah. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.